Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Brown Overboard. I'm your host, Josh Bam Bam Brown. When you live a life in the bush, especially the bush of Alaska, there are many ways that you can put your life in peril. Whether you're talking about getting caught in a storm, almost falling off a cliff, or dealing with the wild animals that you share the wild world with. And I myself have been put into many a situation that I shouldn't have been, or that was semi-unavoidable, but also kind of my fault, which is what a lot of those situations end up kind of being. And even me, even someone who is always trying to pay attention to their surroundings, always keeping an eye on everything, someone who is always respecting the danger, can still find themselves in that situation. Because I've been in a lot of those situations, way more than I would care to admit. And one such situation that I found myself in. So this was a while back. We were in Browntown. It was between one of the times that we were filming. So we had stopped down for a few weeks and we were all just, relaxing and hunting and fishing and trying to build up Browntown a little bit while we didn't have the distractions of the cameras and running around chasing us. And it was just a leisure day. I had gone into town and I had brought back a bunch of supplies and things. And now there was a little float plane dock that was in the same area where Browntown was. It was not something that was readily used by anybody, but it was there and we were able to use it. And sometimes it was easier to bring the stuff there. And we had rebuilt or recarved out some old logging roads that were in that area. So long ago, there were a bunch of logging roads, but they had all been reclaimed by the forest. But we decided to carve out a bunch of them so we could use them, and we would ride our four-wheelers and stuff up and down the logging roads, which is always a lot of fun in those areas. And sometimes it was easier to bring the skiff into that little float plane dock and unload stuff there and then take it down the logging road near where Browntown was, because the logging road ran all over the place. But the logging road did not go down to where Browntown was. It went near there, and then you had to go through a trail that we cut a long ways and then into Browntown. We had actually built that trail up at one point where we had built a boardwalk that went a pretty good ways up the trail. So it would be a fair piece of trail and then the boardwalk and then into Browntown. So I had spent most of the day hauling supplies from the float plane dock by four-wheeler down to where the trailhead was, and then down the trail, and then down the boardwalk, and then into Browntown. And for a little while, I had some help because everybody was willing to help me with the four-wheeler loading and the driving that back and forth. And then when it got to the part where you're actually supposed to haul the items down the trail, people kind of tapered off after a little while. They helped for a bit, and then it just kind of became me doing it, right? And I had broken the strap on my rifle like 3 days before and neglected to fix it. So I actually still have the same rifle, but I had a 45-70 I carried everywhere with me. It's a very dependable, very good gun. And I had broken the strap like 3 days prior, and I had neglected to fix it. And so all day while I was doing all this hauling, I was also having to carry my rifle because, you take it with you everywhere for safety, especially up there with the amount of bears there are. So I was carrying it with me. And when the strap is good, I was able to just strap it across my chest or my back or just sling it over my shoulder, and it was good to go. But without that, I was having to really just carry it with everything else, and it was slowing me down a lot. And I had gotten down to like the last 2 trips of things that I needed to get. I figured I could get it in 2 more trips. And I made a mistake that you're never supposed to make. So I left my rifle propped up at the camp at Browntown, and I went back thinking, well, I only have 2 more trips. If I leave the rifle, I'm not having to carry it with me, then I'm good to go. And so I made one of the last trips, no problem, and went to go get the last one, and I hadn't made it very far down the boardwalk when this happened. when things went wrong, which is usually how it goes. It's not long after you do something stupid that something goes wrong. So I had made the one of the 2 trips, and then just a little ways down the boardwalk, wasn't even off the boardwalk. I hadn't even made it to the part where the boardwalk stopped and gotten to the trail. So I'm walking down the boardwalk, and I hear something rustle off to the right, and of course I'm always like scanning the horizon. You always have your eyes out, and I look and saw one of the worst possible things you could see out there in those moments. I saw 2 adorable, fuzzy little bear cubs, which is more frightening than seeing a gigantic 30-foot tall, billion-pound grizzly bear, because there is, I'm going to say, almost nothing meaner in this world than a mother bear and protecting her cubs. The insane amount of furious vengeance which these mother bears will bring down on you if you even so much as look the direction of their cubs is terrifying. They are very protective and ridiculously good at protecting their cubs. I would much rather stare down a giant, full-grown, mean, in his prime male grizzly bear than even be in the same vicinity as a mother bear with her cubs. Now, possibly everything would be fine, but it's very easy for it not to be fine. And in those moments, a mother bear with her cubs, if you are between her and the cubs, very, very bad. If the cubs are too close to you, very, very bad. And both those things happened in this instance. And when I saw the 2 cubs, I knew the mama bear was close, but I didn't see the mama bear right away. And I started to back away slowly. And that's when the mama bear appeared. She kind of just lumbered up from out of the brush by the tree, because there's some pretty thick brush up there too. Like, it's pretty thick. We had carved it out a good ways because you want to be able to see when things are there. So you want to carve out your trails pretty wide when you carve them out. And so not just because we had built a nice little boardwalk, but just because that's how you carve out your trails, we had carved out a pretty good ways, a pretty good, it was pretty wide, like the area we cleared for our trail. But the thick brush stopped just outside that clearing, and that's where she was. And she just walked right out of the clearing. I mean, out of the brush into the clear by the boardwalk, next to those 2 cubs. And the cubs were in front of her, and then there was me. And immediately she just starts staring at me. Now, when you encounter a bear, whether it's a large male, whether it's a mother with cubs, no matter what it is, you don't want to initially react by running away or turning around or even looking away. It's very important in those first few moments that you stand your ground. Don't be afraid. Be as brave as you can. And whatever you do not turn around and run. Now, I'm going to completely disagree with what a lot of people who are supposedly experts say you're supposed to do. A lot of people say play dead. I would never in a billion years play dead in front of a bear. Ever. No matter what. Wouldn't do it. No. It's a bad idea in my opinion. Because if you do that, you are putting yourself completely at the mercy of the bear. And 9 times out of 10, it's going to come over and it's going to chew on you for a bit, and it's going to knock you around, and it's going to play with you, and it might eat you if it's hungry. If it's just curious, it's still going to bat you around a bit, and that's not going to be a good time. I would never play dead no matter what. My best advice, and what I was taught to do, you look the bear dead in its eyes, and you stand there, and you don't look away. If you can, you get your head higher than theirs. Doesn't matter if you're standing on a hill or a stump or the hood of a car. It doesn't matter what it is in any way, shape, form, or fashion that you can get your head over theirs where they're having to look up to look at you. It's a good thing. They respect the high ground. So it's a good thing to do that if you can, if that's an option. Now, bears also equate to wolves. They realize that you might be a wolf-like creature. You might be a wolverine-like creature. Or you might be prey. Now, if they're familiar with what a human is, then they're going to realize you're a dangerous animal. If they're unfamiliar, then they're going to wonder what's with this thing. Now, a wolverine is not a giant creature, right? It's a pretty small animal, but it's very fierce and it's very fearless. And bears know this. And it's not worth the trouble, so they don't mess with them. Because a wolverine they're going to get hurt if they try to fight the wolverine. The wolverine is going to go for it. So they don't mess with them. Bears also don't mess with wolves because wolves are never alone. You know, it's very rare that a wolf is going to be alone. So bears don't really mess with the wolves. So they realize when dealing with the human, there might be a lot more of this human. There might be way more of them that I don't know are here. Or this human might just be super bad and not worth the trouble of messing with him. So if you turn around and run, or you do anything that's going to trigger its mind to go into predator mode because it thinks that you're prey, that's going to be bad. And if you turn and run, all of a sudden it's going to think deer, it's going to think bunny rabbit. If you hold still, if you stand your ground and you don't smell like fear, it's going to think wolverine, it's going to think wolf. Or it's going to think human if it knows what a human is. And any of those are way better than it thinking you're prey. Because if you turn around and run, you're not going to outrun a grizz. If you turn around and run, you're done. It's over. And whether it wants to or not in that moment, if you do something like that, it's going to trigger its instincts to treat you like prey. And that's what's going to happen. So in this moment, I stood my ground and I stared right at the mother bear. And what you can do after a stare down is back away slowly, right? So what you're supposed to do is do the stare down, and then after a good little bit, you want to just back away slowly, because that's what predators do in the wild. When two predators meet each other face to face, there's the initial stare down, there's the old west stare down, and then they both slowly back away from each other and then go about their day. Which would have worked if this was a male bear, even a mean male bear in his prime. Now, of course, there's always the factors of if it's crazy or how hungry it is or any of those things. But typically, it will transpire that way, where it's just the stare down and then you both back away slowly, which has happened to me many a times. I've done the stare down and back away slowly to quite a few bears. But in this instance, the mother bear, you can pretty much throw a lot of that out the window because she is just going to protect her young no matter what. And one of the things that got me in real trouble in that instance was that the cubs started to come towards me, right? They started to get closer to me. Even when the mother bear, she kind of nudged them, like she was telling them like to back away, like this could be dangerous, get away. They were curious. I don't think the cubs had ever encountered a human before. I was probably the only human they had ever seen. So the cubs were curious. And so they started coming towards me, like do. And that was bad. That was definitely bad for me because immediately as soon as they started stepping towards me, they took like 3-4 steps towards me. And the cubs and the mother bear were only about 25 feet away from me. I don't want to exaggerate, but they were very close. They were like 25 feet or so. And as the cubs got a little bit closer, immediately everything about the mother changed. Her ears went back, her head lowered, because before she was kind of looking at me with a little bit of a tilt into her head and just kind of figuring me out and just doing the standoff. But as soon as those cubs got close, as soon as they started moving towards me at all, her ears went back, her head kind of lowered, her shoulders came up, she started posturing, and I'm like, great. This is about to go really bad because I knew exactly where it was about to go. And I did have my sidearm on me. I had a semi-auto 45, but that would have been the equivalent of throwing rocks at her, and probably would have just made her mad, or more mad, if that was possible. She was getting really, really ticked. So I don't know if it would have been possible to make her more mad. But the sidearm wouldn't have done a lot of good in that instance. It just wouldn't, right? I'd have still done what I could, but I don't think it would have done a lot of good. And also, I couldn't fault her for doing what she was doing. I couldn't fault her for protecting her young and for having those instincts. And she was just being a good mom, so I couldn't fault her for that. Now, what saved my bacon, was that one of the cubs swacked the other cub. And that cub turned around and then swatted at the other one. And they tumbled for a second, like a split second, and then one of them ran off into the woods. And the other one followed. And at that instance, it broke the mother's attention from me to the cubs. And she glanced at them, and then glanced back at me, and then glanced as they ran into the woods. And then she looked the direction they ran, looked back at me, and I could almost hear her saying, "Next time." And then she just turned around, her ears raised, posture changed. She turned around and she jogged off into the woods to chase her two cubs. And they were gone, just into the brush, and disappeared. And I was like, "Thank you, Lord." And I turned around and I walked myself back to camp. I gave him a good 20 minutes, 30 minutes to clear out. Did take my rifle back with me for the last trip. I literally had one trip left. I think I might have ended up making 2 trips because with the rifle I couldn't haul as much. And I went back and I got the rest of the stuff, and that was that. Now, like I said, I've had many encounters with bears. I've woken a bear up before when I was hunting on accident. I just got too close to it, didn't realize it was there, practically stepped on it. But in that instance, even though the bear was huge, it was gigantic, and I was arm's length away, I could have reached out and touched it. It was startled. It was really startled because I woke it up. It was asleep. And when it woke up and kind of stood up real quick and looked down at me, it just freaked out. It was definitely more scared of me than I was of it, because it just freaked out that I was there and that close, and it had been asleep. So as soon as it stood up and saw me, it just took off. It took off running immediately, just took off. So there have been a lot of instances, and there have been other instances where I had to stare down a bear, or you're walking down, an old logging road, and one of them comes out from the brush, and you do a little Western standoff, and then it just keeps on moseying. There have been tons of times when I've been in those situations, but that time with that mother bear and those cubs, it was very close to being really bad. Because had that just gone, had the cubs kept coming towards me, she definitely would have pounced. There is no doubt in my mind at all that I came, seconds and a couple feet away from getting mauled by that mother bear. It was the grace of the good Lord alone, and those cubs being very rambunctious is the only thing that saved my bacon. It's the only thing that stopped it from happening, because it definitely could have happened very easily. And that's what happens when you make the mistake of doing something that you should have been prepared for. And I'm just glad that it turned out the way it did. But again, I can't fault the mama bear for being a mama bear. And she was definitely a good mom. And I'm sure that those cubs got to live a nice childhood because she was so protective, so attentive to them, and such a good mom. Now, another instance of me putting myself in harm's way, and this one was definitely more avoidable. So, one night, and I say night because the sun was just starting to go down, I decided to make a phone call. Now, we had been filming all day, and the crew always showed up really early. They worked 12, 13 hours a day, no exaggeration. They had to travel almost 50 minutes to get there to get to Browntown from Hoona. They had to travel 40 to 50 minutes to get back. and they would work nonstop. And we always filmed until sundown. We always filmed until sundown, and sometimes even after that, because later they actually had built a little base camp area that they could camp out overnight. And some of them enjoyed doing it. Some of them thought it was a real adventure to do it. Some of them just hated it, and some wouldn't do it at all. But on this particular occasion, we had filmed all day, and we had closed out, and the sun was just starting to go down. And I decided to make a phone call. Now, there was nowhere in Browntown, obviously, that phones would work. There was no way to get a phone signal anywhere in Browntown or anything like that. It's not like there was Wi-Fi coming from the trees. And we had 2 cell phones at that time, because we would have one for whoever was going out and about. Let's say we were in town, the family would keep one phone, and whoever was going out to do whatever would take the other one, and that way we could stay in communication, which we thought was really cool. Very, very Captain Kirk. So I wanted to make a phone call, and I knew that there was an area outside of our bay, out in the open. And when I say in the open, I don't mean open ocean. It was just outside of our bay, and it was way more open in the more open water out there. And I knew that outside of our bay in the open water, there was a specific area that I had found that you could get a signal, which was funny because a little further out, the signal would drop. Further in, the signal would drop. But there was a specific little area where I could get a signal that I had found. And so I wanted to make a phone call. So I went out and I got the skiff, and it took me a little while to get to the spot. And the sun was already dipping behind the clouds. Behind the mountains. Because I remember that there were no clouds. It was a beautiful, clear sky. Beautiful day. Beautiful, clear sky. The sun was just setting behind the mountains. It was gorgeous. Beautiful sunset. Water was perfectly still and calm, and no wind or anything. And I was making my phone call, and I had just about gotten through with the call when I noticed some whales coming in. And first I noticed there were a couple orcas, some killer whales, and they were between where I was and Browntown. So they were a little bit towards the bay, towards where I would go to go home. And then I spotted a couple more, 3 or 4 more, on the other side, further out towards the open. And then I noticed a couple more on the other side of where I was, like to my left. And at that point, I realized I was in the middle of the pod. I was in the middle of the orca pod, of the killer whale pod. And I saw a few young ones bouncing around, and I saw some larger ones bouncing around. And as I'm watching all of this, and as I'm looking at them and sitting there like, oh wow, this is so cool, these are so, they're awesome creatures, it was a beautiful, majestic moment. And out of nowhere, one of these killer whales hit the skiff, and he didn't accidentally come up from underneath it or something. Like, he purposefully hit the skiff, like he shouldered it. Right? And I'm not going to say I almost flew out of the skiff. Like, the skiff didn't come out of the water or anything, at least not very far, but it did. It knocked it out of the water a little bit, and it shook the whole thing. Like, I almost fell over. Not out of the skiff, but I definitely almost fell over. It was an intense bump that this whale gave the skiff, and freaked me out, because in 1 second I was all like enamored with the majesticness of the whales, because I've seen hundreds of killer whales, or thousands. I've seen a lot, right? And I've seen a lot of whales and everything, but they were really close, and it was super cool, and they were coming up, and they were blowing and everything, and it was kind of awesome. A few of them were doing a couple dives, and it was pretty cool, until the one hit the skiff. And that brought me back to reality of like, oh wait, yeah, these things are super dangerous. These are not humpback whales. This is not like, these things eat meat. This is not like just a humpback out there on a joyride, right? So in that moment, it snapped me back to, oh yeah, these guys could eat me. Like, because if they wanted to, they could definitely knock the skiff over and try to get me. And it's not like they're stupid. Like, they realize, oh, there's a human up there on the boat, because killer whales are very smart. They're very smart creatures. They're insanely intelligent. If you've ever looked into the eyes of a killer whale, you can see there's a lot going on in there. There's a lot going on. The wheels are turning. And so the one that hit the skiff, he kind of bumped it. He hit it. And then he kind of bumped it. And then he kind of leaned into it, which I thought was a little peculiar. And now my dad actually has had a couple experiences like this as well. And he actually wrote about one of them in One Wave at a Time, his autobiography. But the way he described his experience, it was way more like majestic, way more magical. Mine was a little more intense because at that point it was more like they were upset that I was there. Because the one, he just leaned on the skiff and he didn't stop doing it. Right, he was just kind of pushing on the skiff, and it like the skiff was moving, and he was just kind of leaning on it. And for probably a little while, he sat there just kind of pushing against the skiff. A really big whale. And it's not like he was sitting there and he was, staring at me or he was smiling or something. It's like I could feel the intenseness of that. He was not happy I was there. And once again, like with the mother bear, I think it's because there were little ones there also, like, and that I was in like the center of the pod as well. I wasn't like on the edge. Like somehow they had all like come up around me, and I was like in the center of their family. And so this warrior protector orca was not happy about it, and he let me know that. And so I just sat there and I'm like, we're good. It's all good. And just sat there, and it probably didn't last as long as I feel like it did, because I feel like I was out there for hours while this was going on, but it was probably just mere minutes. It probably wasn't that long. And then as quickly as they had appeared, they disappeared. They're just disappeared. All of them just gone. And then the one was still there, the one leaning against the side of the skiff. And then he just slowly started going down. Like there was no dramatics. He just like slowly went back into the water, and the skiff leveled out. And I, like an idiot, look over the edge. I mean, probably a bad idea, but I had to. And so I'm like looking over the edge, just kind of like peeking. And now a lot of people would think that the water in Alaska is not very clear because it looks so dark. But the truth is that the Alaskan water is very, very deep, but it's very, very clear. Alaskan water is crystal clear. Like the ocean in Alaska is super clear. You can see a very long way down. A very long way down. It is very, very clear. And so I could see this whale going down. And the blackness of the whale started fading out pretty fast and blending into the darkness of the water and the darkness of below. But the white on him really stood out. And I could see him just going down, and he did like a couple twirls underneath me and then sort of swam like diagonally straight down and was gone. And it was super cool. It was very cool. And then they popped up a good ways away, 300-400 yards away. They started popping up and blowing over there and jumping out of the water and everything, having a good time and swimming away. And I gave it a good little while. I gave it a good like 10 minutes or so before, or 10 or 15, before starting up the motor and heading back home. And during the whole encounter, there's no way I was going to start the motor or anything like that, because you don't want a chance nicking one of them. I didn't want to hurt any of them or anything like that, nor did I want to make them any more upset than they already were. So I just, sat there, let them do their thing, and then when they were gone, gave them a little bit of time just to make sure that no one else was around, none of them had hung out or anything. And after like 10-15 minutes, I started up the motor and I moseyed myself home. And no, that was not the last time that I made a phone call there. I think I went back like the next night, actually, because that was the phone booth. That was the Alaskan phone booth. And that was just one of the many instances of something like that happening at the Alaskan phone booth. And that was fun and could have definitely gone way worse. and ended up just being a majestic and intense encounter with the orcas of Alaska. Now, another instance of being in a situation with the wild animals that we share the wild world with. I had gone on a hunt. I've hunted a lot in my life. I hunted a lot as a kid. I hunted a lot as a teenager, a young adult, an adult. When I was, the older adult, full grown man. Done a lot of hunting in my life. And in our before life, hunting was a big part of our life. I mean, it's still a big part of my life. I don't get to go hunting as much as I would like now, but back then it was practically an everyday occurrence. It was something that we did a lot. It was something that we did, together. I've been on a lot of hunts with my brothers. I've been on a lot of hunts with my dad. I've been on a lot of solo hunts, a lot of hunting. And it was a way that we lived. I mean, we fished and we hunted for our meat, and instead of going to the grocery store, we went to the forest. Now, obviously, there's still the instances of going to town and getting your beans, sugar, and bullets. It's hard to find sugar out there in the wild bush of Alaska. And on this particular occasion, I was doing a solo hunt. And I had gone out, and I had probably gone too far because I had gotten it in my head that I was not going to quit until I got a deer. I had been on a couple unsuccessful hunts right before this. I had gone out like all day and not found anything, and I had done it like 3 times and not gotten anything. And so this day in particular, I was getting kind of stubborn. I was like, I'm not going home until I get a deer. This is ridiculous. I'm not going back without one. And so I was having a little bit of one of those like I'm not quitting kind of attitudes, no matter what happens. And I saw a gorgeous buck a little ways into my day, like towards the late afternoon, I guess. And it was gorgeous. It was a gorgeous buck. And it kind of led me further into the woods because I was like, because I saw it pop up, and then I don't know if it was just passing through, if it got spooked, or if it was me that spooked it or something else that spooked it, or if it was chasing a female, or I don't know what was going on. But I saw it for like a split second and then it was gone. But I'm a fair tracker, so I was trying to track it, and I just kept following it deeper and deeper into the woods, and further away from the area that I had been hunting, the area near where we were. And I just kept going. Now, you can hunt by stalking and moving through the forest and tracking, or you can hunt by holding still and just being as still and quiet as possible and hunting an area or finding an area where you're pretty sure something is going to come through. I've always preferred to stalk and hunt. I don't really like to hold still. There are pros and cons to both approaches, but I've always enjoyed a good stalk and hunt. So I was doing that, and for a while, and it had gotten very late in the day, and I saw a buck. It wasn't the same buck. It was another buck. It was a different one, a little bit smaller. And I remember just being giddy. I was like, there it is. This is my chance. And I'm a fair shot. So I just, in like a split second, rose the gun up, took the shot, made the shot, and was victorious. And then I had to make my way to the deer, which was a little further away than I realized as well. Which is something that can happen when you're scope hunting. It can see, you realize that it's further away, but when you're actually going from where you made the shot to go get it, it's a lot further away. And in this instance, I had to kind of climb down a crevice and back up the crevice on the other side. So that was fun. And then the deer was a little bit bigger than I thought it was also. It was smaller than the first one I had seen, and the first one must have been like humongous. It was a very big deer. It was a nice buck. And I didn't mind taking the smaller buck or having found a smaller buck instead, because like my old man, always taught me you don't want to take the biggest deer out there. You don't want to take the granddaddy of them all. You want to take the one that's in between. You know, you don't necessarily want the runt, but you don't want the granddaddy, right? You want the big buck with the giant rack and the big muscles and all that to have a bunch of kids and help the next generation of buck grow to be big and strong. You want him to have a lot of little deer so that they can all, you know, be big and strong and running through the forest and the line of deer continue. Right, so you don't really want to take the best one out there. So I was fine getting one that was a little bit lesser. And I'm not a trophy hunter. I've never been a trophy hunter. I've never been somebody that was preoccupied with, like, you know, how big the deer I get is or how many points it had on its antlers or anything like that. Because I hunt for meat. My whole life I've only ever hunted for meat. There's a small sense of pride with the, oh, I got a big buck, you know, thing. But I've only ever hunted for meat. That's been my whole life. I don't do sport hunting at all. I only hunt to sustain myself. And I never take more than I can use. And I always use everything that I take. Always. And so I got there and I got the deer. And I probably would have field dressed it right there. Except I had passed a little creek not far away. Because you want to field dress them pretty fast because you can't leave I'm not going to get all gross or anything, but you can't leave the guts and stuff inside them because it'll seep into the meat and it'll bacteria and all those things. So you really want to field dress your deer pretty fast. I'd say within an hour, 2 hours is pushing it. You want to field dress them. You definitely don't want to leave it all day. And I knew I was a good ways away from getting home, but I was really close to a creek that I had passed. So I remember thinking to myself, oh, it'd be a lot easier to field dress at a creek than it would be to right here. So I packed the deer on my back, down the crevice, back up the other side of the crevice, which took a while. And I remember I kept slipping. I kept like slipping and sliding and sliding back down. And it was really a chore. To get down the one side of the crevice was pretty easy. Going up the other side, not so much. It was all slick and mossy and everything, and that wasn't fun. But finally, I got up to the other side and made it back down the hill where I was into the little creek. I say little creek because it wasn't a tiny little creek, but it wasn't like a big flowing river. It was a fair creek. It was a nice little creek, and I had stopped on my way past to fill up my canteen and freshen up a bit, and that's probably why that deer was there. He had probably stopped at that creek too. And then when I made it up to that side, to my side of the crevice, and saw him on the other side of the crevice, he had stopped for a second and looked back my direction, which is what slowed him down long enough for me to take my shot. But anyway, so I got back to the creek and I was cleaning the deer. And when you're doing something like that, when you're alone, even when you're not alone, but if you're alone, you cannot just have your head down doing something, especially now that you have a fresh kill with you. You cannot just have your head down, focused only on what you're doing. You have to have your eyes up and be scanning the horizon and looking all around and making sure there's nothing around and protecting yourself and just keeping your eyes out. Now, with a bear, most likely you're going to smell a bear before you see it or before you hear it. And a bear can move through the forest when it wants to way more quietly than you would think. But most often you're going to smell them, and they're pretty easy to spot to a degree. Definitely easier to spot than a wolf. And in this instance, I was looking up, I was scanning around, and there it was. Right there. And I was in a little bit of a clearing where the creek was. I had followed the creek down a little bit and got to a good, nice little area. But just up a little ways, up on the hilly area, because it was pretty hilly in the spot I was in, there was a wolf standing there, just staring at me. A big, big wolf. We're not talking, because I know when I say wolf to some people, they're picturing like a coyote. No, I mean a wolf. I mean an Alaskan wolf. What most people would probably think was a werewolf. Like if a normal person saw what I was looking at, they would think it was a horror movie werewolf, is what they would think, because it's so big and so wolf-like. Like, there's no mistaking an Alaskan wolf. It was huge, and it was jet black. Jet black. And just standing there, staring at me. And I knew. Now, sometimes you may run into a rogue wolf, a lone wolf that's out there. But that's rare, right? The majority of the time, if you see a wolf like that, there's one or two things happening. One, there's a whole pack of wolves, and you're surrounded. And you just don't know it because those wolves are ninjas. They're ghosts of the forest, and you would never know they're there. Or there's at least two others. Because if it's a hunting party, there are at least three wolves. So if you see one, there's at least two more. And sometimes what wolves will do is they will let one of them be seen, sort of as a distraction, or just to test what it is they're following or what they're dealing with. Because in this instance, I think I took the wolf's deer is what happened. I think we were hunting the same deer. I think that I happened to get to it before they could is what happened. Because I don't think that they came upon me after I got the deer. I think they were already there, and I just didn't know it. I think that I took the deer before they could is what happened. And so in that instance, I think the wolf was like showing his presence and being like letting me know that he was there. And so I figured there was at least two other wolves. And while I'm looking at him, he disappeared. I don't mean I glanced away. I didn't blink. Nothing. He's just gone. 1 second I'm looking at this werewolf up on the hill in front of me, not that far away. And the next second, it's gone. Just vanished. Like a magician, just poof. Which they can do. They're very fast and ridiculously ninja-like of just gone while looking at it. It's like Batman the Wolf. And I, at this point, was basically through cleaning the deer and more or less finished cleaning it without looking down at that point. And my dad had taught me, because he had been in scenarios like this more than once. And he taught me that in those instances, you basically have three choices. Choice number one, you can just drop the deer where it sits, let the wolves have it, and go. Go about your way, because they're going to take the deer and they're going to leave you alone. Choice number two, you can just pick up the deer, hope for the best, and get going, which is usually not a good option. Choice number three, you can carve off part of the deer and leave it as an offering for the wolves, take your rest of the deer, and get out. So I was not going to give them my deer. Call it stupidity, call it bravery, call it whatever you want. They were not getting my deer. I was not going home without a deer. They were not getting it. Nope, not happening. I was not leaving my deer. But I also wasn't dumb enough or brave enough to just take the whole thing and say, the heck with you, wolves, it's mine. And I appreciated the fact that they're the guardians of the forest, and he let me know he was there. So I did the honorable thing, and I paid my tithe to the wolves of the forest. So I cut off the back leg, and I left it there by the creek as my offering to the wolves. And I picked up the deer, and I took off. Now, I made it a ways. Part of me wanted to stay. Part of me wanted to just go a little ways away and then watch through my scope and see what happened and watch them come down to get it. But I wasn't going to do that. That would have been pretty stupid because I still had the rest of the deer. Had I left the whole deer there for them, I might have done something like that. But I wasn't going to do that and still have, a deer strapped to my back. That would be pretty dumb. Now, another thing that slowed me down a little bit was because the wind was not with me. Now, my dad also taught me, if you're carrying your kill, you do not want the wind on your back. You don't want, whether you're hunting or whatever, but in this instance, you definitely do not want the wind blowing in front of you, because if it is carrying your scent and the scent of your kill the same direction you're going. You're broadcasting where you're going. So you want to keep the wind on your face, because you want it to be blowing away from you where you're walking into the wind. Because at least that way, anything that's after you or after your kill, anything that's coming at you is going to have to follow the trail from behind you. Because otherwise you're broadcasting where you're going. Much better for you to be walking with the wind on your face, blowing the opposite direction. So I had to kind of go around where I normally would have. Instead of going on a more direct route to get back to where I needed to go, I kind of had to go around, which took longer. Now, as I'm doing this, I was, of course, super, not paranoid, but super aware of what was going on. And it's really different if you've never been in one of those Jurassic Park situations where you know these things are out there and they've been watching you and this is actually going on. It's really hard to put your mind in that moment, right? Now, I watched something like Jurassic Park. I know exactly how that feels because I've been there, right? I've been there. I have done that, and I know what that feels like to know there are raptors in the woods. You know, the T-Rex is out here, that kind of situation. And to be honest with you, I never feel more alive than in those moments. To me, it's not scary in a sense of fear. It's scary in the sense of like I have enough like fear to realize that this is dangerous and to appreciate that fact and to know that this could go really horribly, but not enough fear to make me like afraid of the situation or not want to live that kind of life, because freedom is dangerous. Slavery is security, freedom is dangerous, and I would always prefer uncomfortable and dangerous freedom. And I've never felt more alive or more free than in those moments out in the forest, being one of the animals out there, because I am as much one of the wolves as the wolves that I encountered that day. And they knew that, and I knew that. We both knew that. Like, they knew I wasn't prey. They knew I was a predator, just like them. And a little ways away, I've been going for a while, I kept hearing rustling in the woods, in the forest, around and behind me. Now, I don't know. Maybe it was a squirrel. Maybe it was something else. But maybe because I knew also, like, if the wolves wanted to, I probably wouldn't see it coming, right? Probably would not see it coming. I might, because I'm very attuned with the forest. And when you've lived your whole life out there like that, and I know it probably just sounds like bragging, but there is a different degree of awareness that you reach in that world. And when you exist in that world long enough, and especially when it's the world that you've always existed in, there's a different degree of awareness that you have to understand and to realize what's around you. And so call it a sixth sense, call it whatever you want. I'm pretty sure they were still there. And so I did end up carving off another back leg and just in case. Like, if they weren't wonderful, if they were, this is for you. And I didn't mind making the deer a little bit lighter, and I didn't mind giving a little bit more back to the forest. So I carved that off, left it there, continued on my way. And I did continue without having any other instance of something, no other instance of them coming out after me or them wanting to take my deer. And I made it home, obviously. Obviously, I made it. No, I didn't make it. I didn't survive. But no, obviously, I made it after that. And another instance, though, another time that I will never forget, and another glorious memory I have of just that life and that lifestyle. And definitely not the only time I've ever had an encounter with wolves and things. But that one definitely stands out to me because I'll never forget being at that creek. I'll never forget it. And looking up, seeing that wolf, and just the moment that wolf and I shared also. Just that moment right? Pretty cool. Pretty cool. I wouldn't trade my life for anything. The way that I grew up, the way that I've gotten to move through the world, the experiences that I have had, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I really wouldn't. It's been an amazing life. It's been fantastic to get to have the experiences that I have, to have been able to exist in that world and to have grown up in that world, and for that to be the world that I come from. I think it's another thing that just gives me such a different viewpoint than the average individual, because everyone else, or a lot of everyone else, views humans and mankind to be separate from nature, where it's like there's nature and there's animals and then there's humans. And nothing could be further from the truth, because that's just not the truth. That's not the way it is. In reality, we are as much a part of nature as every other creature on this planet. And we all share this planet together. And the more you realize that, the more that you realize we're all one spirit together, I think the better life you can live. All right, guys. Thank you very much for sitting down with me and listening to some of my stories from the past and stories from the wilderness. Stories of the bush. I'll see y'all guys next time for another episode of Brown Overboard.